Now I turn to John Quiggan's solution of the problems of original prospect theory. I already told you that original prospect theory, published in 1979, was a very good step forward. It had this very good idea also psychologically that we need probabilistic sensitivity through this probability weighting function W, but the formula was not 100% good yet. It did violate stochastic dominance sometimes, so that was a problem. So when people, the field in those days, they knew that this is a very good tool. We needed to be psychologically realistic to fit data, but they could not think of any completely good formula to have probability weighting. Then there was a completely unknown Australian master student. That was John Quiggin in those days. He was your age, master student, completely unknown. He was the only one who saw how you can do it right, how you can have probability weighting and in a mathematically correct manner. So I'm going to tell you now, I will not tell you his full idea, only two special cases because we don't have time, you know. But now how he solved the problem and that way made it possible to have good prospect theory. And in fact, this was the only then the behavioral approach really started running well. And the machineries were working well for the first time. So he solved the problem. This, you know, this formula, the origin formula, I told you it violates stochastic dominance. So John Quiggan invented a way to do probability weighting without violating stochastic dominance. So there's John with his clever idea. His theory is called rank-dependent utility, RDU. Well, the problem was he was completely unknown, but he also did not know well how to write papers. So his paper was not so easy to read. So people, top journals didn't want, and he finally found the journal was not a very famous journal. People did not pay attention to it. So for several years, his idea remained unnoticed. He did give a behavioral foundation. He understood that that is important. So in fact, he preceded Chu 1983. I told you a while back that Chu 1983 for several years, people thought, oh, this is the first non-expected utility theory, the first behavioral theory with a reference foundation. But now we know historically that Quiggan preceded Chu Sahong in that regard. Anyway, only several years later, it was Chu himself who discovered this Quiggan paper. He understood how good it was. And then he told colleagues, hey, look, this is good. And then the field, because Chu was already well known, then many people in the field started understanding. Then John Quiggan's idea became understood. And then John Quiggan became famous. Maybe a few years after, he had already forgotten his own idea, you never know. But only several years later, he became famous for that idea. But now he's well recognized. Well, so Tversky-Kahneman, at the end of the 1980s, heard about this idea of Quiggan. They were very happy because now there was a solution that they had not been able to find themselves. So then they immediately worked on prospect theory to incorporate that new idea. Then they got a completely completely sound, completely good version of prospect theory, where not only the psychological realism, but also mathematical soundness come together, which is typical of the behavioral approach. So people often say that 1979, prospect theory was born. So the behavioral approach was born, but it was a baby still. It was not adult. It still needed to grow. And only in 92, it became mature. It became a real full-blown theory. So only since 92, really the behavioral approach has really been taking off. That's how people often position things historically. Their theory, the new version of prospect theory, is often called cumulative prospect theory, but cumulative is a bit of an unpleasant technical term. So it's just use the term prospect theory for the new version is better, because the old version we don't need anymore. So let's use the most convenient term also. Tversky himself preferred that the term be used for the new theory from then on. So they did not only have ideas about probability weighting, happily using Quiggan's idea, but the other ideas were also there about reference dependence, utility for gains, different than utility for losses, and loss aversion, and several things. But I will not discuss, we don't have time. I will only focus on probability weighting for their theory. I already told you, especially since 92, now that the theory is complete, sound, everything. It is the most popular theory for, well, many expect utils, maybe even more popular. It can still be used in many situations. But if you want to have behavioral realism, empirical realism, then prospect theory is the most popular alternative. And number two, but quite behind, is then disappointment aversion by Farragal. In general, the betweeners theories, I showed you two theories that satisfy betweeners, the Go theory and the two-weighted utility theory. So Go was disappointment aversion theory. There were several others. It was a whole family of theories satisfying betweeners. They lost popularity nowadays. A little bit may have been unfair. They were often tested in a domain that was unfavorable to them. There is more in these theories maybe than first meets the eye. And I can well imagine that because the theory we have now, it's clear that prospect theory is maybe the best, but it's clear that it's not perfect. We will need improvements. Maybe when the ultimate theory comes, we'll incorporate parts of ideas of betweeners. So it's good that you learn that people know about these theories. Anyway, at this moment, they're not very popular. So here is some plea for your prospect theory. Also still, even now, there are some empirical problems and all these things. Let's not get into that. I already told you we will not treat this marvelous John Quiggan idea in full generality, but only two simple, because we don't have time, two simple special cases I will present to you in this course. And the first one is biseparable utility, as it is called. So in biseparable utility, in fact, also Miyamoto 1988 proposed this, and for a risk, and Girodato and some other Duncan Lewis, but also Girodato and Marinacci are famous, well known for it. They extended it to uncertainty, something we will not treat in this course. These people did this biseparable utility that I'm going to explain to you now, and that's sort of a special case of Quiggin. Quiggin was more general, so more impressive. But this is, there's a photo of John Miyamoto, there, Girodato and Marinacci photos. So biseparable utility considers only prospect with two outcomes, x1, x2, and then it is x1 is better than x2. And that is important to know. The ranking of the outcomes matters for the formula. That's expressed by the term, the name of the theory, rank-dependent utility. So here, the best outcome is treated differently than the worst. For the best, we simply transform the probability. But for the worst, we don't transform the probability. We don't put here the W1 minus P. We put here 1 minus WP. So a bit different. Maybe what I said, the other thing, if we had taken here W of 1 minus P, then it would be like the theory of prospect theory that you already saw before, that was used in 1979, roughly. Well, let's not be very precise now. But anyway, that formula had been used a lot before, and it turns out that that didn't work well. And replace here the W of 1 minus P by 1 minus WP, if you can follow. That turns out to be a golden idea. That's really what makes it work. And it does mean that the best outcome is treated differently than the worst outcome, hence the term rank dependent. So here were several people who proposed this formula, and this is only for two outcomes, but John Quiggan was then the only one who understood how it can be done in general for more than two outcomes. So we don't have time to treat it, but that's why still, there are several names here, but John Quiggan was really the biggest inventor in what is coming here. Anyway, some notation. So capital U denotes utility function, and you already know W is probability weighting, you saw it before. Ranking of outcome methods, already said. And an important thing is that this formula can satisfy stochastic dominance. And even John Quiggan, this clever idea to do it, extend this to more than two outcomes. John Quiggan understood how it can be done satisfying stochastic dominance. He was the only one who knew how to do that. That was the biggest, maybe in a way, maybe the biggest mathematical idea in the whole field of behavioral decision making, because then only the fit could start running. So that was John Quiggan's idea. Biseparable utility, as it is defined, in itself imposes no restriction on how it should be for three or more outcomes. And then John Quiggan did that. That was a great thing. But biseparable, as I define it here, doesn't speak to it. Anyway, the biseparable utility formula can also be used to accommodate the Allais paradox. But the thing is The Allais paradox involves only one non-zero outcome, and there biseparable utility is still the same as this original prospect theory. There it doesn't bring novelty yet. And therefore, the calculation that we used in original prospect theory to accommodate the Allais paradox, all of them remain exactly the same for this biseparable utility. Therefore, I will not repeat them, but you can just read them again and then have in mind, oh, now I take this as a biseparable utility, and then it still works. And that's much nicer, in fact, because then you know, now we have a really sound theory with really mathematically proper way of doing probability weighting, and that can also accommodate a Allais paradox. But as I said, the calculations are identical, so I will just not repeat them. You can just read them. All right, so now comes the second case of John Quiggin's theory, the second special case that we treat, but that will be in the next recording.